Shalom, and welcome to Keeping the Shul Lights On, a podcast about the challenges of operating a synagogue, creating a Jewish community, and the hard work and efforts of a congregation's executive director and Jewish organizational leadership. Brought to you by Shul Marketing. Concerned your congregation and community are not responding to your Shul Marketing? Discover the strategies to connect with them, reach them where they are, and develop the results your leadership is seeking. Here is your host, Howard Walpoff.
Welcome back to Keeping the Shul Lights On. Thank you for joining us today. This is brought to you by Shul Marketing, and we're having another conversation about leadership and also the development of a synagogue. And the guest I have today has a very interesting story to tell because he's actually been the executive director of his current synagogue twice. And it is in addition to being just a very interesting individual who comes from a different country, yet as we discussed before, he's still from the South, and we'll go through that there. I'm pleased to have Barry Herman from Ahavath Achim Synagogue in Atlanta, Georgia, with me today. And so, Barry, welcome to our conversation.
No, I appreciate it. I'm really looking forward to it. So thanks so much for the lead up. I hope I'm worthy of all that hype. We shall see.
Well, I'm sure you are, because you really have accomplished a lot in your career, and it really wasn't. It was something that was from the heart, from the soul, but not really from your mind's direction to be an executive director. So, why don't you share with us how you started with your synagogue and the role that you were in, and how it evolved into taking on the role of executive director?
Sure. So it was by happenstance, although I'd always been a shul goer, although floating in and out of observance like most people, never worked in a shul before other than volunteer. My late parents were always involved in the shul, so it was always at that level. And what happened was I had a business here in Atlanta. I had a lighting business, and I had issues with my green card. Cut a long story short. I conduct the Atlanta Jewish Male Choir. We've done a couple of big fundraisers here at the synagogue, and so I got to know all the Balabatim who were on the board. And when I had issues with my green card, they jumped in to help sponsor me. And I came back to the United States after going back to South Africa as the ritual director here. My background is business. I've been a business owner for most of my adult life. So I just got involved in a million different things here because I was bored. And then at a point in time, the current executive director was let go. The synagogue president at the time, her son had worked for me in my business in Atlanta for 4 years. So she knew me as a business person, and she asked me to step into that role, which I accepted. And I did that right up until I got my green card. And then subsequent to that, I stayed on for another number of years. So I worked my first stint for about 8.5 years. And then I left the shul business for about 4.5. And then I was called to come back because they let the executive director, who was my successor, go. And I came for a couple of months and stayed for 4 years. So that's my long story as short as possible.
Well, it's always interesting the ways that shuls can pull you back into service in some way or another. And but it's an interesting way that you started in, obviously being a member and being involved. You knew people obviously enough for them to create the role or have you come on as ritual director, but that really does give you a lot of connectivity with people. You're interacting with people on a regular basis, whether it's in advance or day of at a service, giving people an honor and connecting with the individuals of the congregation.
No, and in fact, I'll take it one step further. One of the greatest benefits was that I administered the Bnei Mitzvah program. And I volunteered and taught the kids because I remember Chazanut is something that I really love, and I know many of the big Chazanim in the United States, and I called them for advice. They said, get involved with the kids. You'll never have any kind of problem, and that's what I did. And to this very day, I leveraged those relationships with parents, with grandparents, and by the time I became the executive director, they were relating to me in a whole different manner. So that really worked out real well. And we chatted a little early on about everything in life being about relationship building and everything else being commentary, and this really plays into that. So by the time I became the executive director, they were used to interacting with me in a whole different level, and in a whole different space, and that really helped me a tremendous amount. So it was serendipitous, worked out real well for me.
Yeah, you really are in the people business as opposed to just looking at it as the operational business category, or just being the person who is making sure the services are happening. It really is the connectivity of people and how they want to be a part of activity or fundraising or services, and the ways that you can nurture those relationships to get them more involved in all the different aspects.
I mean, the truth of the matter is it's across all spheres. So, I mentioned I've been a businessman for most of my life in the retail space. I had a really big business in South Africa. I had about 200 employees reporting to me. I started that business all by my lonesome. And the same principles applied there as it applies to the Shul business. You just got to learn the different idiosyncrasies of the environment that you're in, but relationship building and working with people and working with money, those are universal. It doesn't matter. Business is business. So maybe you put a bit more heart and soul into it when it's a faith-based kind of thing, I guess. But the principles really do remain the same.
Now, coming into it with a business background, you were able to really focus on the heart of what an executive director does is running in a big operation. You're running a very large budget. You're running a large staff. You're running a lot of programming. How did that differ from the things you were doing day to day with your own business?
It actually was a beautiful thing because I was unencumbered by the baggage of being an executive director. And at the time, the president of the congregation is also just a business owner. They parachuted him in. He hadn't gone through the regular channels of being a committee chair or whatever, because the synagogue was in crisis at the time. And between the two of us, we were, at it, and we both were business people, and we approached it the same way. And so I was unencumbered by protocol. And not necessarily a good thing, but sometimes when things are dire, you need to just go and get things done. So what I did was I just focused on the 4 or 5 things that made a difference, most of them related to money and standards and reporting. Again, there's nothing complicated about it. It's really very simple things. I always say I'm not that smart. I just execute basic things real well. And so I made sure we had reporting on time. So you knew what your profit and loss reported by the first week of the new month, as opposed to 2 months later when it's too late. Look at the big ticket items, things relating to salaries and to the building. And so honestly, it wasn't really all that much different. Once I kind of gotten myself settled in, principles really do remain the same. You look at the bottom line, you're responsible for revenue and you're responsible for expenses. I will say that, in speaking to my colleagues and having been in the business for a little while, the role of an executive director has changed dramatically. And I know that big synagogues are really struggling to find good executive directors, because in the past you were an operations manager, I guess, and perhaps a finance manager, whereas now you have to have business skills and entrepreneurial skills. So the focus of an executive director has changed, and I know it's a huge challenge because, people from a business background, there's no incentive for them to come work in a synagogue. Especially this is a large institution. Where would I go from here? So you need to have someone who's maybe semi-retired or something like that, who's made enough money that can come in and they can focus on it, because there's no real career path. And so if you want to attract a business person to come into this business, it's very difficult. It's a real challenge. But the traditional executive director will crash and burn in today's world.
You bring up a lot of interesting comments. Let me focus on the last part, because
Sure.
you really have to have some of that nomadic concept and feel in you to be a career executive director, similar to rabbis and then members of the
For
clergy.
sure.
You may have a contract with the synagogue that goes 3 years, 6 years, and then you may decide you need a new change. But you look around your community, there's no other synagogue that matches this. You now have to pick up and do a search, and as other synagogues are searching, and
Sure.
move across the country for that next step, as opposed to any type of job in a community. You just find a different job within the community and keep on going.
No,
So
100%. I mean, that really is the challenge at the end of the day. And big synagogues are really struggling to find it. And I see that now as I mentioned to you that I've made my intention known that I'm going to be moving on as soon as they find someone. If it takes 6-7 months, that's fine. I'm not in a rush. But we've engaged with a search firm, and it's really very challenging to find executive directors for the reasons that we mentioned a few minutes ago.
now you mentioned as well that you paired up with a president who had not been, I guess, groomed to be president, and executive directors deal with a lot of different personalities on the board itself and the presidents based on just the cycle of who is, I guess, committed the most in their volunteerism and their time to eventually serve as president. How have you experienced those different personalities along the way, and how has that helped the development, or have you found some challenges within the responsibilities of the president with what you have to do day to day?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was speaking to my counterpart at the temple, who's just retired after having been the executive director there for 42 years.
Wow.
I admire his staying power. But I once mentioned that to him. I said to him, you've got a situation where you've got a synagogue president. Being the executive vice president in no way prepares you for being the synagogue president. It may only be one leap up, but it's a massive goal all of a sudden to be the person involved, almost a full-time job. And so I said to him, you've got a synagogue president that's maybe effective for a year. The first 6 months of their presidency, they're learning what's going on. The last 6 months, they're lame duck. And he said to me, the consistency's got to be in the staff. And you'll find that most religious institutions, their staff have been there for very many years. So even here,
Yes.
a lot of our staff have got 18, 19 years with the service. Me too, if I hadn't left, I'd have 17 or 18 years. So that's number one. Number two, I think that not having been in a synagogue executive director and also being comfortable, I don't need this job. And so it brings some kind of freedom. So, I will step out on a limb and dig my heels in areas that many people just wouldn't feel comfortable to do. And that just also comes from dealing with your own business and having to be responsible for signing a paycheck. So there's certain things that you can't always get consensus on. And so you have to break in a new set of presidents. Nobody really knows how to deal with me properly, and that's fine. I'm the only executive director in 130 odd years that doesn't have a contract by design. I don't want one. Now, when I first became the executive director, our attorney came to me and said, you have to sign. He said, I don't need the protection. If you don't like me, tell me to go, I'll go. It's really not a problem, because that's how it works in South Africa. And so coming back here the second time around, when I saw, what faced me, I mentioned was a very dire situation again, because they called me back. Same thing. I called a business person, very successful here as a venture capitalist here in Atlanta. Never been a synagogue president before. I called him. I said, I need your help. I called 4 people together. We came up with 4 or 5 things we needed to focus on, and we just executed. And then COVID happened, so I stayed a little bit longer. It's not ideal. I mean, the truth of the matter is that you are in a not-for-profit and you're dealing with volunteers. And so there's a very fine balance between being very collaborative and not letting the tail wag the dog, because this is a multi-million-dollar business and I am responsible for people's lives and salaries. And we take that very seriously. So, I've been doing it for a really long time. So I've got a good feel and I can get away with a lot. But I can understand if a new executive director comes in, you've got to get to know the people and the process and the culture. But it's a very tough thing to do. It's a very tough thing to do.
It's interesting you mentioned about digging your heels in on different situations because you had that comfort and not as concerned of blowback in the process. But it's very different in the fact being an executive director and a business owner, where you're still responsible for revenue and employees and those essential pieces, but you're making the decisions, like really looking at the bigger picture, but looking forward. Here at a synagogue, it's not just you making the decisions, and you have a lot of people with emotional interest in the synagogue, or pet projects or entities that are very important to them that may not play in the big picture, but definitely have value. And you have to sift through that in trying to make the right fiscal decisions and for the synagogue moving forward?
You know what? It's not as complicated as it sounds, because ultimately there aren't that many things that really will affect in a meaningful way what your financial picture looks like. And so, I've learned not to get down into the weeds. I've learned not to get distracted. I've also learned to say that there's certain things I won't get around to. Just deal with it, because if you want the overall picture to be good, this is what's going to happen. And after a period of time, you get trust, because people know that you can deliver. So the first time I was at the synagogue, I balanced the budget every single year until the day I left. And for 1 year after I came back, I did the same thing. So there's a high degree of trust. And so what I'm saying is that it's easy to be distracted by all the pet projects that everyone has. But you have to understand that you have limited resources, both financial and human. And so our staff can only deal with a certain amount. And so for me, the freedom has been to be able to say no, just no. A lot of people are afraid to do that. I'm not. You don't have to be obnoxious. You can be assertive without being disagreeable in any possible way. And that's just a life skill that comes from being in business a lot. So you can say the things and do what it is that you have to do without being personal, disagreeable, nasty, or any of those things. You can do it in a very loving way. And it's all about how you message and how you deal with people. It's not that complicated.
Now, we've mentioned a lot of the challenges that you've had within the two different terms of being executive director. But what are the things that you enjoy the most coming to the synagogue every day and interacting with?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I could really pigeonhole it like that. I'm a very unusual human being. Even when life is really difficult, I've learned to take the joy out of life, whatever it is. So, whatever I've done, even if it's something I've not enjoyed doing in my life, you're coming there and your state of mind, people feed off that, especially when you're in a leadership position. And so coming to work, working in a synagogue, I enjoy it. I enjoy the people I interact with. I enjoy the work. But it's a mindset. I make it that way. That's not to say things aren't challenging or frustrating or any of those things. I just put it in its right box, and I don't take it personally. So I guess I'm an unusual person that way. I do get a lot out of helping my community, because I've always done that as a volunteer. I'm a serial volunteerer, I guess. But no, that's just my personality. Whatever I do in life, I try and take enjoyment from. Otherwise, life's pretty miserable.
It makes perfect sense the way you frame it and the way you think about the day to day. And it's interesting what you say about volunteerism, because it can be enjoyable, it can be addictive, it can take away sometimes from the real work that you're supposed to be doing while you're volunteering. But within your congregation, how hard or easy has it been to get congregants to volunteer and either utilize their talents in a different way, maybe grooming them for board and positions and committee chairs, or just having them find their right place to involve and be part of the community?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a perennial challenge for anyone who's involved in a not-for-profit, and that's outside of the religious space too, anything. Volunteerism and fostering volunteerism continues to be a challenge, because I look at myself, I'm a volunteer too. Sometimes I'm really good and sometimes I'm really terrible. And so, we've got all the mechanism in place. We have an Ahavath Institute, which is a leadership academy, which is quite well funded, and people have to go through a process, and they get given certain skills, meeting management skills, various other things, and they get exposure to the different parts of the business, and then they become a committee chair, and then they become a board member, an officer, and so there's a process that they follow. But like most religious institutions, it's often the same people. I will say it's nice now to see a lot of younger folk after COVID have really been stepping up. But volunteerism is the hardest part, honestly and truly, and you have to be able to do it, because you have to achieve your results for other people. So we have 34 committees. We have a really a thriving committee structure, and all works pretty well. And even then, when it comes to senior leadership and board members, every year we scratch our heads and go, like, who's going to step up? And so the culture of volunteerism is It's a tough thing, and any institution that tells you they're having an easy time of it, no matter how well they do it, I don't believe them. Because people fall in and out of love of being a volunteer. Sometimes they've got other things going on in their lives. They're traveling, perhaps, or
Sure.
they've got kids going on, or they're dealing with a crisis, and myself included. And so it's a huge commitment to step up into senior leadership of a synagogue. And often when people see what's involved, they step back real quick. You've got a life to live. Everyone's busy. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Now, speaking of challenges, we've mentioned COVID a couple of times, but haven't really focused on it. How challenging was it during that period of COVID and shutdowns, and how were you able to start opening up the synagogue to allow people in and to try to create programs again, and what kind of timeline were you on to implement that?
Sure. I mean, it goes without saying it was a challenging period for everyone. We got a school as well. The school is its own separate 501c3 organization, has its own board of directors, even though reporting to me. Running a preschool during COVID was a lot more challenging than running a synagogue. So, outside of in the very beginning when nobody knew what was going on and we were making stuff up, we had, like everyone else, we had a COVID committee, mostly made up of medical doctors, kind of disregarded the CDC. We've got a number of members who are senior members within the CDC here in Atlanta, and they all said it's a government organization that's cover your ass. What's happening? And so the doctors on the front lines is where we took our advice from. So on the synagogue side, once you leverage those relationships, even though the building wasn't open, our congregation just wanted to help. And we balanced the budget and had a surplus for those years. We had services. I didn't ask for tickets or any kind of paper play if it was all virtual. And I was always worried, you leverage tickets for dues and didn't have to worry. People paid their money. Our fundraising efforts are really good. But we had to do it the good old-fashioned way, pick up the phone and speak to people. We reached out to our congregation maybe 4 or 5 times, the entire congregation, multiple times during the year. And we had some initiatives, helping people who were in need, and that changed as time went on. And we leaned into technology heavily. So I got a donor who gave us about 100 grand. And I spent it all on tech. So we've got state-of-the-art audio-visual equipment. We've just redone our sanctuary, and everything's been acoustically designed. And
Very nice.
I have a tech who runs the equipment because none of us know how to work it. So we leaned into that way. And also, I never thought I'd ever say this, but thank God for the federal government. Even though they were printing money and we're suffering for it today, I'm proud to say that my main focus over that period of time was to keep everyone employed. And between the synagogue and the school, everyone was employed. I took 2 draws on the PPP loan for the school, 1 at the synagogue. I didn't have to the second year, and we got a stable grant for the school, and it kind of kept us going. Thank God for all of those things. But getting back to services in person has been challenging, like most people who lean into tech. So, but slowly but surely, people are starting to, they want to come back, including the challenge of bringing an office full of staff back. Because remember, they worked remotely for a little while. And, I read all the literature and listened to what my colleagues were doing. And slowly but surely, we started bringing people back into the office. And now they're here 3 days a week. And because I understand the value of collegiality and working together that you can't get via Zoom. And then to answer your question very finally, although I put a budget together for both institutions, I managed cash flow. The budget actually made zero difference because we weren't in the building. And it was a crapshoot from, year to year. Were we going to be in the building or not? Who knows? So I would budget accordingly, but I just made sure that I had enough money in the bank to be able to pay salaries and utilities. And I managed it like that for a good long while. But that's, my business roots. Cash flow is king. It really is. If you ain't got money to pay wages, you're in real trouble. So thank God we've survived in really good shape. But it was a challenge. But I was very pleased that our congregation, including the parents at the school, they wanted the staff to be employed, and they cared about it, and they stepped up to the plate. Very happy to say.
Well, it definitely speaks to the level of community that you've helped build over the course of all this time. And that speaks to community, that the parents want to make sure that the staff is being paid and stays through so if the when things get back to normal so they
For
can
sure.
still be a part of everything. And it says a lot about what really is going on within your congregation and how they view each other and being part of that congregation.
No question. And, again, dues I was really worried about. Fundraising, you pick up the phone or you go on Zoom and you raise money that way. But, dues would just come in on autopilot, especially towards the high holy days where you would leverage tickets for dues. And I made the decision, it's the wrong time. People want to come and pray, they come and pray. And I guess that messaging kind of worked out. Maybe it's the fact that we're a 130-year-old plus institution and people have very deep roots here, but it was really very refreshing. And the personal support that I got from congregants, even sometimes making unpopular decisions related to COVID and attendance, and people call me and say, Jewish people are not shy with opinions. I don't agree with you, but thank you for trying to keep everybody safe, which was very refreshing. Really, really was. So even though we didn't have consensus, people respected the fact that we were trying to do the very best we could in unprecedented circumstances. So it was all good, actually, all things considered.
And that's important. And that really has value to, again, back to community, that people have that respect, even though there were some varying opinions. And the fact that you can plug directly into the CDC, having people in the congregation there as part of your medical committee
But
is
very senior people, director level people, PhDs who are very senior. I shan't mention their names because they still work there, but we were very privileged sometimes to get policy from the horse's mouth, pretty much.
and that's outstanding. We had a very strong group of medical people in our synagogue making those decisions, but not wired in like that. So it's a good asset to be in the right place.
No, I felt sorry for them, honestly, because the pressure that they were under, because
Oh,
everyone was looking to the
absolutely.
CDC for answers and they knew as much as we did. And so the stress that those poor people were under, because I'd speak to them regularly, not just to get advice, but just pastorally, how you doing? It took strain, but we
Yeah,
all here.
they definitely had while everyone had an experience during that time, their experience really was magnified with their role in the process.
No, no question.
So, what looking back at your career on everything that you've done at the synagogue, is there one thing you can say you're most proud of?
I would say there are a number of things of recent, definitely keeping everyone employed because I was really concerned that people would, not be, not that it turned out to be something completely different where it was an employees market, but who knew? But that thing for sure ranks up there as being the most meaningful, if not the thing that I'm proudest, the most proud of. I've come back twice and rescued the synagogue from very serious financial issues. I guess I'm proud of that too, but I didn't really process it in that way. I just get on with my day to day, whatever it might be that I'm doing in my life, and really process it that way. People have been incredibly good to me and my family. To my adult children today, or one is married, they're in their 30s. They were little kids when we came to the United States, and this congregation has treated us as their own. And I mentioned when I left the first time, I gave a year's notice. Who does that? And I left with absolutely no unfinished business. Who can say that? And same here, moving on into the sunset, same story. I just love everybody, even the people who give me a hard time. I love them also because I've been here for a long time and you get to know people. And so I guess if I had to maybe if I say it like that, the relationships that I've built, and in the 4 or 5 years that I was not the executive director, I kept those relationships. And I would call people from time to time, which stood me in really good stead when I came back here because all of a sudden I hadn't been calling them for money. And so they were real relationships. I guess I'm the most not proud of, so I'm the most grateful for those relationships and the support that myself and my family have received from this congregation over the very many years. Very meaningful to me personally.
Well, it definitely seems to me that they're well deserved, and you really put your heart and soul into keeping the shul lights on and making sure that the synagogue was not just functioning but thriving in all aspects in the school and the shul. And you really have a great story to tell, and I'm glad that you shared it with us today. So Barry, thank you so much for joining us.
And I appreciate, I always say this is both the most rewarding and frustrating thing I've ever done in my life. And it remains to be that way. And thank you for the opportunity. I never thought in my life I'd be a synagogue executive director. Go figure.
Life takes you in every different direction. You just
The
have to keep
truth.
your feet on the ground and see where it takes you.
Great.
But thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
And thank you all for joining us as well. This really was an amazing conversation. A synagogue in need, someone coming in and stepping up, not once, but twice in the process, and really getting them in good standing and good stature, and really moving forward in a very positive way. This is obviously a very strong conversation with a congregation with a lot of history, and Barry's definitely highlighted and made the present just as strong as the past. So it's always great to have conversations like this, and always great to learn from them as well. So I hope you learned as much as I have. So go out, have a great rest of today, and we will see you next time.